The entire prison laughed when the coffee hit the old man's uniform. Nobody was laughing a few weeks later. The transport bus rolled through the final security gate of Blackstone Prison just after 8 o'clock on a gray Monday morning. Among the new arrivals sat Marcus Jackson, a 62-year-old black inmate with short gray hair, calm eyes, and a quiet presence that drew almost no attention. He carried a small property bag, spoke only when necessary, and spent most of the intake process observing the world around him. To the officers, he looked like another older inmate nearing retirement age. To the prisoners waiting inside Housing Unit C, he looked even less remarkable. By lunchtime, word had already spread that a new older guy had arrived. Most people ignored the news. One man did not. Travis Walker was one of the most influential inmates in the housing unit. Tall, confident, and surrounded by people who constantly sought his approval, Travis enjoyed deciding who mattered and who did not. When Marcus entered the dining hall carrying his lunch tray, Travis noticed him immediately. The older man moved with an unusual calmness. No nervous glances. No attempts to impress anyone. No effort to fit in. Marcus simply found an empty seat and quietly began eating. Travis smirked. "Look at this guy," he said to the men around him. Several inmates turned to look. Marcus continued eating as if he had heard nothing. "He looks like somebody's grandfather got lost on the way to a library," another inmate joked. Laughter spread across the table. Marcus remained focused on his meal. That reaction only encouraged them. Travis had spent years studying people. Most newcomers displayed fear, pride, anger, or insecurity. Marcus displayed none of those things. The older man seemed completely unaffected by the attention. That bothered Travis more than he wanted to admit. Later that afternoon, the housing unit gathered during a scheduled break period. Some inmates watched television. Others played cards or discussed sports. Marcus sat alone near a window reading a worn paperback book he had received from the prison library. The sight immediately attracted comments. "You planning to get a college degree in here?" one inmate shouted. More laughter followed. Marcus glanced up and smiled politely. "You never know. Learning is usually a good investment." The answer surprised several people. They expected embarrassment. Instead, they got confidence. Not aggressive confidence. Not arrogant confidence. Something quieter. Something harder to understand. Travis leaned back in his chair and watched carefully. The older man did not fit the usual pattern. Most people reacted emotionally when challenged. Marcus seemed completely comfortable. As the afternoon continued, curiosity slowly replaced amusement. Daniel Brooks, an inmate who worked in the prison library, noticed Marcus reading and recognized the title immediately. It was not an easy book. Most prisoners avoided material like that. Marcus appeared deeply engaged. Every few minutes he would pause, reflect, and continue reading. Daniel found himself wondering who this man really was. The answer became even less clear during dinner. Marcus moved through the crowded cafeteria with remarkable awareness, politely greeting officers, thanking kitchen workers, and treating everyone with equal respect. He never rushed. He never seemed distracted. Most importantly, he never appeared intimidated. That confidence did not come from physical size or social status. It seemed to come from somewhere much deeper. Unfortunately, not everyone viewed it positively. Travis increasingly interpreted Marcus's calmness as a challenge. By the end of the day, he had made up his mind. The new inmate needed to learn his place. Meanwhile, Marcus returned to his assigned bunk and unpacked his few belongings. A small photograph, several books, a notebook, nothing else. As lights out approached, the housing unit settled into silence. Around him, conversations faded. Television screens went dark. Yet Marcus remained awake for several minutes, staring thoughtfully at the ceiling. He seemed almost amused by something. Across the room, Travis watched from his own bunk. Tomorrow, he decided, would be different. The old man had been ignored long enough. What Travis did not realize was that the quiet black prisoner he planned to embarrass was carrying a past far more extraordinary than anyone inside Blackstone Prison could possibly imagine. The next morning began like every other morning inside Blackstone Prison, with the sound of metal doors opening, officers calling instructions, and inmates moving toward breakfast. Marcus Jackson followed the flow of people without drawing attention to himself. He carried the same calm expression he had worn since arriving, and once again he seemed completely unaffected by the tension that often filled the housing unit. Across the room, Travis Walker noticed him immediately. The decision he had made the night before remained firmly in place. In his mind, the new inmate had become a challenge. Not because Marcus had done anything wrong, but because he refused to react the way everyone expected. During breakfast, the dining hall buzzed with conversations. Marcus collected a tray and quietly moved toward an empty seat. Before he could sit down, Travis stepped into his path, holding a cup of coffee. Several inmates nearby immediately paid attention. They sensed something was about to happen. Travis smiled, as if preparing a joke. "You settling in okay, old man?" he asked. Marcus nodded politely. "So far, so good." The answer seemed to disappoint Travis. He had expected nervousness or irritation. Instead, he got the same calm confidence as always. A few seconds later, Travis made his move. With a careless gesture disguised as an accident, he tipped the cup forward. Coffee splashed across the front of Marcus's prison uniform. Gasps and laughter erupted from nearby tables. Several inmates leaned forward, eager to see what would happen next. For a moment, the entire section of the dining hall focused on Marcus Jackson. Most people expected anger. Others expected embarrassment. A few expected an argument. Marcus looked down at the stain on his shirt. Then he looked back at Travis. To everyone's surprise, he simply reached for a napkin and began wiping away the coffee. The laughter slowly faded. Travis frowned. "That is it?" he asked. Marcus continued cleaning the uniform. Accidents happen. Several inmates exchanged confused looks. Travis knew perfectly well that everyone understood what had happened. Yet Marcus refused to acknowledge it as an insult. The response completely disrupted the moment Travis had been trying to create. "You are not upset?" Travis asked. Marcus smiled slightly. Would being upset make the shirt cleaner? A few inmates laughed, but this time the laughter was directed somewhere else. Travis immediately noticed the difference. Marcus then picked up his tray and calmly sat down at a nearby table. The conversation throughout the dining hall resumed, but something had changed. People continued glancing toward Marcus. Not because he looked weak, because his reaction made no sense. Most inmates spent enormous amounts of energy protecting their pride. Marcus had just allowed himself to be embarrassed in front of dozens of people without showing the slightest concern. Daniel Brooks witnessed the entire exchange from across the room. The more he watched Marcus, the more curious he became. There was no fear in the older man's eyes. No humiliation. No attempt to prove himself. It was almost as if Marcus viewed the incident as completely unimportant. Later that afternoon, word about the coffee incident spread throughout Housing Unit C. Some inmates called Marcus soft. Others called him smart. A few admitted they had never seen anyone respond that way before. Meanwhile, Marcus returned to the library and resumed reading the same book he had been studying the previous day. He appeared completely unaffected by the attention. As the hours passed, Travis found himself becoming increasingly frustrated. The humiliation had failed. Instead of looking weak, Marcus somehow looked stronger. Not physically stronger. Something else. Something harder to define. Near sunset, Daniel approached Marcus near the window. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Marcus closed his book and smiled. "Of course." Daniel hesitated. "Why did you not react this morning?" Marcus looked out the window for several seconds before answering. "Because some people test your strength." Daniel nodded slowly. "And?" Marcus reopened his book. The strongest response is not always the loudest one. Daniel stood there thinking about the answer long after the conversation ended. Across the room, Travis continued watching. For the first time since Marcus arrived, a small feeling of doubt entered his mind. Maybe the old man was not exactly who he appeared to be. The question was becoming impossible to ignore. What kind of person stays completely calm after becoming the center of attention in a prison dining hall? The coffee incident should have ended the conversation surrounding Marcus Jackson. Inside Blackstone Prison, moments like that usually followed a predictable pattern. Someone was embarrassed, someone gained status, and everyone moved on to the next distraction. Instead, the exact opposite happened. 2 days later, inmates were still talking about it. Not because of what Travis Walker had done, but because of what Marcus had refused to do. The older man had shown no anger, no embarrassment, and no desire for revenge. That reaction made people uncomfortable. Most prisoners understood conflict. They understood pride. They understood arguments. Marcus had introduced something far more confusing: self-control. On Wednesday morning, Daniel Brooks found himself paying closer attention than ever. He noticed Marcus arriving at breakfast at exactly the same time as the previous 2 days. He noticed Marcus greeting the kitchen staff politely. He noticed Marcus carrying himself with a level of balance that seemed unusual for a man in his 60s. Nothing dramatic stood out, yet every movement appeared deliberate. Every step seemed efficient. Daniel could not explain why he kept noticing these details, but he could not stop. Meanwhile, Travis continued watching from a distance. The failed attempt to embarrass Marcus bothered him more than he cared to admit. Instead of looking weak, the older man somehow appeared stronger after the incident. Several inmates had even begun defending him during conversations. That was not supposed to happen. During the afternoon recreation period, a group gathered near the indoor walking track. Conversations shifted between sports, news, and prison gossip. Marcus sat alone on a nearby bench reading another library book. At one point, an inmate accidentally dropped a stack of papers while walking past. Several sheets scattered across the floor. Before anyone reacted, Marcus calmly stood, stepped forward, and caught one page before it drifted beneath a table. The movement happened quickly but looked completely natural. Most people ignored it. Daniel did not. Neither did Travis. For a brief second, both men exchanged a glance. They had noticed the same thing. The older man moved surprisingly well. Marcus handed the paper back to its owner and returned to his seat, as if nothing unusual had happened. Later that afternoon, Daniel approached him. "You seem pretty active for somebody your age," he said casually. Marcus smiled. "Movement is important." Daniel sat beside him. "You exercise?" Marcus nodded. "Every day." Daniel laughed. "Most people say that. Very few actually mean it." Marcus closed his book. "Discipline is easier when it becomes a habit." The answer sounded simple, but once again Daniel felt there was more behind it. Throughout the next several hours, similar moments continued appearing. Marcus always seemed aware of what was happening around him. He noticed things before other people did. He moved with confidence, but never arrogance. Most importantly, he never seemed stressed. In a prison environment where tension was constant, that alone made him stand out. That evening, Travis gathered with several friends in the day room. The conversation eventually turned toward Marcus. "You still think he is weak?" one inmate asked. Travis immediately answered, "Of course he is." Yet the response sounded less confident than before. Another inmate shrugged. "I do not know. Something feels different about him." Travis frowned. "Like what?" The man pointed across the room where Marcus sat reading near the window. "Look at him. Nothing bothers him." Travis followed the gesture. Marcus appeared completely absorbed in his book. The noise of the housing unit seemed to disappear around him. For reasons he could not explain, Travis felt increasingly frustrated. The older man was becoming a puzzle he could not solve. As lights out approached, Daniel returned a cart of books to the library storage room. While organizing the shelves, he noticed Marcus checking out another title. The subject caught his attention immediately. It focused on leadership, discipline, and personal mastery. Daniel watched Marcus walk away carrying the book. For the first time, a strange thought crossed his mind. What if Marcus Jackson was not simply a calm old inmate? What if the qualities everyone kept noticing were the result of decades spent mastering something very few people understood? The question stayed with Daniel long after the lights went out. And somewhere across the housing unit, Travis Walker was beginning to wonder exactly the same thing. Thursday arrived with the same routines, the same announcements, and the same concrete walls surrounding Blackstone Prison. Yet something had shifted inside Housing Unit C. Marcus Jackson was no longer invisible. Nobody openly admitted it, but more people were paying attention to him than ever before. The strange part was that Marcus seemed completely unaware of the attention. He followed the same schedule, visited the same library, and spent the same amount of time reading near the window. If he noticed the growing curiosity around him, he gave no sign of it. Daniel Brooks certainly noticed. The questions that had started as simple curiosity were becoming something else. Every day revealed another small detail that did not fit the image of an ordinary older inmate. None of the clues were dramatic on their own, yet together they formed a pattern Daniel could not ignore. That afternoon, the housing unit recreation area was busier than usual. Several inmates were playing cards while others watched television. Marcus sat alone at a table, reading as always. Nearby, a maintenance worker had temporarily left a rolling supply cart beside a wall while replacing ceiling panels. The cart was stacked with boxes and tools. Most people paid no attention to it. Then something unexpected happened. One of the wheels shifted slightly on the polished floor, causing the cart to begin rolling. It moved slowly at first, then picked up momentum as it crossed the room. Several inmates noticed it too late. One man stood directly in its path, distracted by a conversation and unaware of what was approaching. Before anyone could shout a warning, Marcus stood up from his chair. What happened next lasted only a second. He calmly stepped forward, reached out, and stopped the moving cart with one hand before it reached the inmate. There was nothing flashy about the movement. No dramatic display. No struggle. He simply intercepted the cart and guided it safely to a stop. The entire room fell silent for a moment. Marcus looked around, confirmed everyone was fine, and returned to his seat. Then he reopened his book. The conversation slowly resumed, but Daniel could not stop thinking about what he had just seen. The cart had been heavier than it looked. More importantly, Marcus had reacted instantly. Not fast for a man in his 60s. Fast for anyone. Across the room, Travis Walker had witnessed the entire thing as well. He frowned. Something about the movement bothered him. It had looked effortless, natural, as though Marcus had repeated similar actions thousands of times before. Later that day, Daniel approached the older man again. "You always seem to know exactly what is happening around you," he said. Marcus looked up from his book. "Awareness is a useful habit." Daniel smiled. "Most people are not that aware." Marcus considered the statement. "Most people spend more time reacting than observing." The answer lingered in Daniel's mind long after the conversation ended. Meanwhile, rumors continued spreading throughout the housing unit. Some inmates believed Marcus had a military background. Others guessed he had worked in law enforcement. A few claimed he might have been a professional athlete years ago. Nobody actually knew. Marcus never volunteered information about himself. Every question received the same polite but vague response. That mystery only made people more interested. Even Travis found himself watching Marcus more often than he wanted to admit. The old man no longer seemed weak. In fact, Travis was beginning to realize that he had never looked weak at all. People had simply assumed he was. That realization created an uncomfortable feeling Travis rarely experienced: doubt. That evening, as the sun lowered beyond the prison yard, Marcus sat near the window reading another book. The orange light illuminated the pages while the rest of the housing unit buzzed with conversation. Daniel noticed something unusual as he walked past. A small photograph rested between the pages of Marcus's book, marking his place. For only a brief second, Daniel caught a glimpse of the image before Marcus closed the cover. The photograph showed Marcus standing beside a large group of people wearing matching uniforms. Daniel could not make out the details, but one thing immediately stood out. Every person in the picture appeared to be looking at Marcus with tremendous respect. Before Daniel could ask about it, Marcus calmly slipped the photograph back inside the book and returned to reading. The image stayed in Daniel's mind for the rest of the night. Who were those people? And why did it suddenly feel as though Marcus Jackson had once lived a life far larger than anyone inside Blackstone Prison could imagine? By Friday morning, Marcus Jackson had become the most discussed man in Housing Unit C without ever trying to attract attention. The strange thing was that almost none of the conversations involved anything Marcus actually said. Instead, people talked about what they had seen. The coffee incident, the moving cart, the photograph, the calmness. Each detail seemed insignificant by itself, yet together they created a mystery that nobody could fully explain. Even Travis Walker found himself thinking about Marcus far more often than he wanted to admit. What had started as amusement had slowly turned into fascination. Travis was used to understanding people quickly. Marcus remained impossible to read. During breakfast, Travis watched from across the dining hall as Marcus quietly greeted a kitchen worker by name. The worker smiled and greeted him back. A few minutes later, Marcus helped an older inmate carry a tray to a table without making a big deal about it. Then he sat down and ate in silence. Nothing about the behavior was extraordinary, yet people seemed naturally comfortable around him. Travis noticed something else as well. Whenever Marcus entered a room, conversations did not stop because people feared him. They stopped because people became curious. That was a different kind of influence entirely. Later that morning, Daniel Brooks found Marcus in the library once again. The older man had already finished 2 books during his short time at Blackstone and was beginning a third. Daniel sat across from him. "Can I ask another question?" he said. Marcus smiled. "You usually do." Daniel laughed. The photograph from yesterday. Who were those people? Marcus looked at him for a moment before closing the book. Former students. Daniel immediately leaned forward. Students. Marcus nodded. A long time ago. Daniel expected more information, but Marcus reopened the book. The answer only created additional questions. Students of what? Where? Why had so many people appeared to respect him? The mystery deepened instead of shrinking. Throughout the afternoon, Travis continued observing. The more he watched, the more unusual Marcus appeared. Not because of anything dramatic. Because of consistency. The older man never seemed rushed. Never seemed distracted. Never seemed angry. In a place where emotions often controlled people, Marcus appeared to control his emotions instead. That realization bothered Travis more than he cared to admit. Near the end of recreation time, another small event caught everyone's attention. Two inmates began arguing over a seat near the television area. Voices grew louder. Several people turned to watch. Before officers needed to intervene, Marcus calmly walked over and spoke quietly to both men. Nobody else heard what he said. Yet within seconds, the argument ended. One inmate shrugged. The other laughed. Both returned to their activities. The situation dissolved completely. Daniel stared in disbelief. Travis did the same. What did he say? Someone asked. Neither inmate seemed interested in explaining. They simply moved on. Marcus returned to his chair as though nothing had happened. The incident spread through the housing unit almost immediately. For some inmates, it became another clue. Marcus possessed a strange ability to influence people without demanding attention. He never raised his voice. He never tried to dominate conversations. Yet people listened. That evening, Travis sat alone longer than usual. Across the room, Marcus occupied his familiar spot near the window, reading beneath the fading sunlight. For the first time since the older man arrived, Travis found himself questioning his original assumptions. Maybe Marcus was not weak. Maybe Marcus was not ordinary. Maybe the calm confidence, the awareness, the discipline, and the respect shown in that photograph all pointed toward something much larger. As lights out approached, Daniel returned a stack of books to the library desk. While organizing the checkout records, he noticed something interesting beside Marcus's name. Several of the books Marcus had requested focused on leadership, philosophy, self-discipline, and martial arts history. Daniel paused. Martial arts history. The phrase immediately caught his attention. It might have been nothing. It might have been coincidence. Yet for some reason, Daniel could not stop staring at the title. Somewhere inside Blackstone Prison, a hidden story was slowly beginning to reveal itself. The question was no longer whether Marcus Jackson had an extraordinary past. The real question was just how extraordinary that past truly was. Monday morning brought an unusual sense of anticipation to Housing Unit C. Nobody openly discussed it. Yet many inmates found themselves watching Marcus Jackson more closely than before. The mystery surrounding the older man continued growing with every passing day. What made it even stranger was that Marcus seemed entirely unaware of the attention. He followed the same routine as always. Breakfast, reading, exercise, library, reflection. Nothing changed. Yet everything around him was beginning to change. Shortly after lunch, an officer entered the housing unit carrying a clipboard. Several names were called for appointments, work assignments, and administrative matters. Then one more name echoed across the room. Marcus Jackson, visitor processing. The announcement immediately attracted attention. Marcus calmly closed his book and stood. Daniel Brooks looked up from across the room. Visitors were not unusual inside Blackstone Prison, but Marcus had only recently arrived. The timing felt significant. Marcus thanked the officer and walked toward the visitation area with the same steady pace he used everywhere else. As soon as he disappeared through the door, conversations began. Who do you think is visiting him? One inmate asked. Another shrugged. Family, maybe. Travis Walker listened quietly. For reasons he could not explain, he found himself interested in the answer. Nearly an hour later, a correctional officer returned to the housing unit after completing visitation supervision. The officer spoke briefly with another staff member near the desk. The conversation lasted only seconds, but Daniel noticed something unusual. Both officers glanced toward Marcus's empty seat near the window. Then one of them smiled. It was a small detail, yet it immediately stood out. Meanwhile, inside the visitation room, Marcus sat across from a sharply dressed man in his 40s. The visitor carried himself with confidence and success. More importantly, he looked genuinely happy to see Marcus. Throughout the conversation, the visitor listened carefully whenever Marcus spoke. Several times he nodded respectfully. At one point, he even laughed and shook his head as if remembering something important from years ago. The meeting continued for nearly an hour. When it finally ended, something happened that did not go unnoticed by staff members nearby. Before leaving, the visitor stood and extended both hands toward Marcus in a gesture of deep respect. Marcus smiled warmly and returned the gesture. The visitor then thanked him several times before departing. Nothing about the interaction resembled a typical prison visit. Back in Housing Unit C, Marcus returned to his usual chair near the window, carrying the same calm expression as always. Daniel immediately noticed. "Good visit?" he asked. Marcus smiled. "Very good." Daniel waited for additional details. None came. Marcus simply reopened his book. The response only increased Daniel's curiosity. Later that evening, information began spreading through the prison in the strange way information often does. Nobody knew the entire story, but fragments started appearing. The visitor was reportedly a successful business owner. According to one rumor, he had traveled several hundred miles specifically to meet Marcus. Another rumor claimed he referred to Marcus as a mentor. By dinner, at least 5 different versions of the story were circulating through Housing Unit C. Travis listened to every one of them. For the first time since Marcus arrived, Travis felt something unexpected. The old man no longer seemed like a puzzle. He seemed like a secret. The difference mattered. One implied confusion. The other implied significance. That evening, Daniel finally asked a direct question. Who was he? Marcus looked up from his book. An old student. Daniel blinked. Student? Marcus nodded. A very successful one. The answer immediately triggered dozens of new questions. Daniel sat down across from him. What did you teach? Marcus smiled softly and closed the book. For a moment it appeared he might actually answer. Instead, he looked out the window toward the fading sunset. Different things at different times, he said. Then he reopened the book and continued reading. Daniel laughed quietly in disbelief. Every answer created a bigger mystery. Across the room, Travis watched the exchange unfold. One thought kept repeating in his mind. If Marcus truly had former students visiting him from hundreds of miles away, then perhaps everyone inside Blackstone Prison had been asking the wrong question. Maybe the real question was not whether Marcus Jackson had an extraordinary past. Maybe the real question was how many extraordinary people owed part of their success to him. The visitor's appearance became the defining topic inside Housing Unit C for the next several days. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the same mystery. Who exactly was Marcus Jackson before arriving at Blackstone Prison? The answer remained frustratingly out of reach. Marcus continued living exactly as he had before. He read books, exercised quietly, treated everyone with respect, and volunteered almost nothing about his past. Yet the less he said, the more curious people became. Daniel Brooks found himself thinking about the visitor constantly. The phrase "old student" replayed in his mind. Marcus had used those words so casually, as though having successful former students travel hundreds of miles to visit him was completely normal. Daniel knew it was not normal. Late Tuesday afternoon, an unexpected clue appeared. The prison library had received a small donation of magazines and educational materials from an outside organization. As Daniel sorted through the stack, he noticed a publication focused on leadership and personal development. Most inmates would never have looked twice at it. Daniel almost placed it on the shelf before something caught his attention. A photograph near the back of the magazine showed a large group gathered at an awards ceremony. The image itself was unremarkable, but one face seemed strangely familiar. Daniel stared for several seconds. Then his eyes widened. Standing near the center of the photograph was a younger version of Marcus Jackson. The image appeared to be at least 15 years old. Marcus looked stronger and younger, but there was no mistaking the calm expression. More surprising was the caption beneath the photo. Part of the text had been damaged, making it difficult to read. Daniel could only make out a few words. International Academy. Instructor. Excellence Award. The rest was missing. Daniel immediately checked the publication date. It was nearly 2 decades old. His heart started racing. Before he could examine it further, another inmate approached the desk asking for assistance. By the time Daniel returned, the magazine had already been moved into circulation. He spent the remainder of the afternoon trying to locate it again. Across the housing unit, Travis Walker experienced his own growing frustration. Every new detail seemed to create more questions instead of answers. The visitor, the photograph, the books, the unusual awareness. Nothing fit together. Travis had expected Marcus to eventually reveal himself as a former athlete, military veteran, or teacher. Yet the clues pointed somewhere else entirely. That evening during recreation, Travis watched Marcus helping another inmate organize legal paperwork. The older man patiently explained several filing procedures and pointed out mistakes that needed correction. Within minutes, the inmate thanked him repeatedly. Marcus simply smiled and returned to reading. Travis shook his head. The man seemed capable of helping almost anyone with almost anything. As sunset approached, Daniel finally found the magazine again. It had been left on a table near the library window. This time he examined the photograph more carefully. The caption remained partially damaged, but another line of text nearby caught his attention. It referenced an academy known for producing elite martial arts instructors. Daniel read the sentence twice to make sure he understood correctly. Martial arts instructors. Suddenly, several pieces of the puzzle began connecting in his mind. The balance, the awareness, the discipline, the confidence, the former students. The realization felt almost unbelievable. Before he could investigate further, an officer announced evening count. Daniel reluctantly placed the magazine back on the table. Across the room, Marcus closed his book and stood for count as usual. He appeared completely unaware that another piece of his hidden story had nearly been uncovered. Yet Daniel could not stop thinking about what he had just read. If the photograph truly came from a martial arts academy, then Marcus Jackson was hiding far more than a successful teaching career. And for the first time, Daniel began wondering whether the quiet old man sitting near the window might once have been one of the most respected martial arts instructors in the country. The discovery in the library stayed with Daniel Brooks for the rest of the week. Every time he saw Marcus Jackson reading quietly by the window, the same words echoed in his mind. Elite martial arts instructors. The phrase seemed impossible to ignore. Daniel wanted answers, yet he knew directly questioning Marcus would probably lead nowhere. The older man had mastered the art of revealing just enough information to create curiosity while keeping the most important details hidden. Meanwhile, the atmosphere inside Housing Unit C continued evolving. What had begun as amusement had transformed into respect for some inmates and fascination for others. Even the men who originally laughed at Marcus now found themselves watching him differently. Travis Walker experienced the biggest change of all. Weeks earlier, he had viewed Marcus as an easy target. Now he spent more time observing him than anyone else. The problem was that every observation only deepened the mystery. One afternoon during recreation, Travis sat with several inmates discussing the latest rumors. "I heard he used to run some kind of school," one man said. Another shook his head. "No, I heard he trained professionals." A third inmate laughed. Everybody has a different story. Travis remained silent. For the first time, he no longer trusted his own assumptions. The old man had shattered too many of them already. Across the room, Marcus sat reading as usual. At one point, an inmate approached him carrying a folded letter. The man looked frustrated and confused. Marcus accepted the paper, read it carefully, and spent several minutes helping the inmate understand its contents. By the end of the conversation, the inmate looked relieved. He thanked Marcus repeatedly before walking away. The scene repeated itself several times throughout the week. Different people approached Marcus with different problems. Some needed advice. Others needed help understanding paperwork. A few simply wanted someone willing to listen. Marcus treated everyone exactly the same. Patiently, respectfully, without expecting anything in return. Daniel noticed that pattern too. The more he watched, the more one conclusion seemed unavoidable. Marcus had spent years teaching people. Nobody developed that level of patience by accident. Then another unexpected clue appeared. Late Friday afternoon, a package of donated educational materials arrived at the library. While organizing the shipment, Daniel discovered an old martial arts magazine tucked between several books. Most of the pages focused on tournaments, schools, and instructors from years ago. As he flipped through the publication, a familiar face suddenly appeared. Daniel nearly dropped the magazine. There was Marcus again, younger, stronger, standing beside a large group of uniformed students. This photograph was much clearer than the previous one. More importantly, the caption remained intact. Daniel read it twice to make sure he was not imagining it. Master instructor Marcus Jackson receives recognition for developing one of the nation's most respected Taekwondo training programs. Daniel felt his pulse accelerate. The answer had finally appeared. Not a military officer. Not a professional athlete. Not simply a teacher. A Taekwondo master. For several moments, Daniel simply stared at the page. Everything suddenly made sense. The balance. The awareness. The discipline. The confidence. The students. Even the way Marcus moved through the prison environment. Years of martial arts training connected every clue. Daniel carefully closed the magazine. He did not show it to anyone. Not yet. Somehow, the discovery felt important. Meanwhile, Marcus remained completely unaware that another piece of his hidden past had surfaced. That evening, he sat near the window reading while the sunset painted the prison yard in shades of orange and gold. Travis glanced toward him several times throughout the evening. The old man seemed exactly the same as the day he arrived. Calm, quiet, ordinary. Yet Travis increasingly suspected that ordinary was the last word anyone should use to describe Marcus Jackson. As lights out approached, Daniel looked once more at the magazine hidden inside the library desk. The headline remained impossible to ignore. For weeks, everyone inside Blackstone Prison had been asking who Marcus Jackson used to be. Now Daniel finally had part of the answer. The question was whether Marcus had simply taught Taekwondo, or whether his influence had reached far beyond anything that headline revealed. Daniel Brooks barely slept after discovering the magazine article. The headline kept replaying in his mind. Master Instructor Marcus Jackson, one of the nation's most respected Taekwondo training programs. For weeks, he had suspected the older man possessed an unusual past. Now he finally had proof. Yet the article created as many questions as it answered. If Marcus had once operated such a successful academy, why had he never mentioned it? Why did he seem completely uninterested in discussing his accomplishments? And perhaps most importantly, how many people outside Blackstone Prison still remembered who he was? The answer arrived sooner than Daniel expected. The following Tuesday, another visitor signed in at the prison. This time, the event attracted attention before Marcus even entered the visitation room. Several staff members recognized the visitor's name immediately. By lunchtime, whispers had already begun spreading among employees. Something unusual was happening. Marcus received the visitor notification shortly after noon. As always, he reacted calmly. He thanked the officer, closed his book, and walked toward visitation without displaying the slightest curiosity. Daniel watched him leave. Across the room, Travis Walker did the same. Both men felt the growing sense that they were witnessing pieces of a much larger story. Inside the visitation room, Marcus was greeted by a woman in her late 30s wearing professional business attire. The moment she saw him, her face lit up. She smiled broadly and immediately shook his hand with both of hers. Throughout the visit, the woman appeared genuinely honored to be sitting across from him. Several times she laughed while Marcus spoke. Other times she listened so attentively that it seemed she did not want to miss a single word. Near the end of the meeting, she removed a photograph from her purse and showed it to Marcus. The older man studied the image carefully before smiling. Whatever memory the picture represented clearly meant something to both of them. When visitation ended, the woman thanked Marcus repeatedly. Then she did something that caught the attention of everyone nearby. Before leaving, she bowed her head slightly and told him, "I would never be where I am today without your guidance." The words were not loud, but several people heard them. By evening, fragments of the story had already begun spreading through Blackstone Prison. Nobody knew exactly who the visitor was. However, a staff member eventually revealed one important detail. The woman owned a successful training and consulting company operating across multiple states. According to publicly available information, she employed dozens of people and regularly spoke at professional conferences. The revelation immediately intensified the rumors surrounding Marcus. Daniel listened carefully as new theories circulated throughout the housing unit. Some inmates now believed Marcus had trained athletes. Others believed he had worked with executives and business leaders. A few insisted he must have been famous. Travis found himself becoming increasingly frustrated. Every attempt to place Marcus into a simple category failed. The man seemed to have influenced successful people from completely different worlds. That evening, Daniel finally decided to ask a more direct question. He approached Marcus near the library window where the older man sat reading. "The people visiting you, Daniel said carefully. They seem very successful. Marcus smiled. Many of them worked extremely hard. Daniel nodded. But they all talk about you the same way. Marcus closed his book. How is that? Like you changed their lives. Marcus remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he answered. People change their own lives. Sometimes they simply need someone to help them believe it is possible. Daniel sat quietly after hearing the response. It sounded exactly like something a teacher would say. Not just any teacher. Someone who had spent decades helping others improve. Across the room, Travis continued watching. The old assumptions were completely gone now. Nobody was laughing at Marcus anymore. Nobody was calling him weak. The man who had once seemed insignificant had gradually become the most respected inmate in Housing Unit C. Yet the most surprising part was that Marcus himself appeared completely unchanged. As lights out approached, Daniel looked across the room at the quiet figure reading beside the window. The article, the visitors, the students, and the stories all pointed toward the same conclusion. Marcus Jackson had spent years shaping extraordinary people. The only mystery remaining was how many more former students might still be out there waiting to remind Blackstone Prison exactly who he used to be. The weeks following the second visitor changed Blackstone Prison in subtle but undeniable ways. Marcus Jackson still occupied the same seat near the library window, still read the same types of books, and still carried himself with the same quiet confidence. Yet now people looked at him differently. The rumors were no longer based on guesses alone. Pieces of evidence had begun stacking together. The photograph, the visitors, the magazine article, the former students, the respected academy. Each clue pointed toward a truth that was becoming impossible to ignore. Daniel Brooks felt closer than ever to understanding who Marcus really was. One afternoon, while helping organize educational materials in the library office, Daniel stumbled across another unexpected discovery. Among a collection of donated newspapers and archive publications was an article discussing influential martial arts instructors who had shaped the development of Taekwondo programs across the United States. Most of the names meant nothing to him. Then he noticed a familiar photograph. This time there was no uncertainty. The image clearly showed Marcus standing beside a large group of instructors wearing matching uniforms. Daniel immediately began reading. According to the article, Marcus Jackson had spent decades developing training programs that produced hundreds of certified instructors. Several of those instructors later opened their own academies across the country. Others became national competitors, coaches, and respected educators. The article described Marcus as a master instructor known for discipline, humility, and technical excellence. Daniel stared at the page in disbelief. The story was even bigger than he had imagined. Marcus had not merely taught Taekwondo. He had trained the very people who went on to train others. His influence had spread far beyond a single school. Later that day, Daniel approached Marcus near the window. He carried the article folded carefully in his hand. For several seconds, he considered showing it to him. Instead, he sat down quietly. Marcus glanced up from his book and smiled. "You look thoughtful today," he said. Daniel laughed. "That is because every answer creates 5 more questions." Marcus nodded. "That happens sometimes." Daniel studied the older man. "Did you ever imagine so many people would remember you?" Marcus looked toward the yard outside. "I never focused on being remembered." "Then what did you focus on?" Daniel asked. Marcus closed the book gently. "Helping people become better than they believed they could be." The answer sounded simple, but Daniel realized it explained almost everything. Every visitor who arrived seemed to carry the same message: respect, gratitude, admiration. They were not visiting Marcus because he had been famous. They were visiting because he had changed their lives. Across the housing unit, Travis Walker continued observing these developments. The transformation in his attitude was becoming impossible to deny. He no longer viewed Marcus as a target. In fact, he found himself listening whenever the older man spoke. The lessons were never complicated, yet they always seemed meaningful. One evening, Travis overheard Marcus explaining something to a younger inmate struggling with frustration. "Control what you can control," Marcus said. "Everything else deserves less attention than you think." The younger inmate nodded thoughtfully. Travis found himself doing the same. As the days passed, more information surfaced. Another former student sent a letter. A staff member recognized the name of Marcus's academy from years earlier. Even some officers began speaking about him differently. The mystery that once surrounded Marcus was slowly turning into a legacy. By the end of the month, one conclusion had become clear throughout Housing Unit C. Marcus Jackson was not simply a former Taekwondo instructor. He was a man whose teachings had shaped countless lives. Yet despite all the recognition, Marcus remained exactly the same person he had been on the day he arrived. He still read quietly. He still helped others without seeking credit. He still avoided talking about his accomplishments. That consistency impressed people more than any article or visitor ever could. And for Travis Walker, the realization was becoming impossible to avoid. The old assumptions he had formed during that first week were completely wrong. The man he once dismissed as weak had spent decades earning the respect of people across the country. The only question remaining was whether Marcus would ever reveal the full story of how an ordinary-looking older inmate became one of the most respected Taekwondo masters anyone in Blackstone Prison had ever heard about. By the beginning of the second month, Marcus Jackson's reputation inside Blackstone Prison had become something nobody could have predicted during his first day. The man who arrived quietly carrying a small property bag now occupied a unique place within Housing Unit C. He held no official position. He controlled no group. He sought no attention. Yet people listened when he spoke. More importantly, people trusted him. That trust had been earned slowly through consistency rather than force. Every day, Marcus demonstrated the same qualities: patience, discipline, respect, reliability. In an environment where those qualities were often rare, they stood out more than ever. Daniel Brooks had become one of the few people Marcus regularly spoke with. Even then, most conversations remained focused on ideas rather than personal history. Marcus seemed far more interested in discussing growth, responsibility, and mindset than talking about his own accomplishments. One afternoon, Daniel finally asked a question that had been bothering him for weeks. "Do you ever miss teaching?" Marcus looked up from his book and smiled. The question seemed to trigger a memory. "Sometimes," he admitted. Daniel nodded. "I figured you would." Marcus stared out the window for a moment. "The interesting thing is that teaching never really stops." Daniel looked confused. Marcus gestured toward the housing unit around them. "People think teaching only happens in classrooms. It does not. Every conversation teaches something. Every action teaches something. People are always learning from each other." Daniel sat quietly as the words settled in. The answer sounded exactly like something Marcus would say. Simple on the surface, deeper the longer someone thought about it. Meanwhile, Travis Walker found himself wrestling with thoughts he never expected to have. Weeks earlier, he had measured strength using the standards he had always known: confidence, influence, reputation. Yet Marcus challenged every one of those assumptions. The older man possessed influence without demanding it, respect without seeking it, confidence without displaying it. Travis increasingly realized that Marcus represented a kind of strength he had never fully understood. That realization became even clearer a few days later. During recreation time, several inmates gathered around a television discussing personal goals for life after prison. Most conversations quickly dissolved into complaints or unrealistic plans. Marcus listened quietly for several minutes before offering a simple observation: "The future becomes easier when you prepare for it before it arrives." The sentence sounded obvious, yet the discussion immediately changed. Suddenly people were talking about education, employment, and practical steps they could take now. Marcus did not dominate the conversation. He merely redirected it. The effect was remarkable. Daniel watched the entire exchange unfold. So did Travis. Both men noticed the same thing. Marcus had spent years teaching people because teaching was part of who he was. He could not turn it off even if he tried. Later that week, another letter arrived from Marcus. Mail itself was nothing unusual. The contents were. After reading the letter, Marcus smiled quietly before folding it and placing it inside one of his books. Daniel happened to be nearby. "Good news?" he asked. Marcus nodded. "One of my former students opened a new academy." Daniel laughed. "Another student?" Marcus smiled. "There are quite a few." The answer barely surprised Daniel anymore. At this point, he suspected the number was far larger than anyone realized. As evening approached, Travis made a decision he had been avoiding for weeks. He walked across the housing unit and stopped near Marcus's chair. Several inmates immediately noticed. The history between them was impossible to forget. Marcus looked up calmly. "Good evening, Travis." Travis hesitated. For perhaps the first time in years, he seemed unsure what to say. Finally, he spoke. "I think I judged you wrong when you got here." The room grew noticeably quieter. Marcus studied him for a moment before smiling. Most people make mistakes. Travis nodded slowly. Yeah, I guess they do. Then something unexpected happened. Marcus extended his hand. Travis accepted it. The exchange lasted only a few seconds, yet it carried enormous significance. Not because it resolved an argument, because it revealed how much had changed. Weeks earlier, Travis had viewed Marcus as someone beneath him. Now he viewed him as someone worthy of respect. As lights out approached that night, Daniel reflected on everything that had happened since Marcus arrived. The mystery that once surrounded the older man was gradually being replaced by something far more powerful: understanding. Yet Daniel suspected the biggest revelation was still waiting somewhere ahead. After all, people continued arriving from outside the prison carrying stories about Marcus Jackson, and each new story seemed larger than the one before. The conversation between Travis Walker and Marcus Jackson became one of the most talked about moments Housing Unit C had witnessed in months. Not because it involved an argument or confrontation, but because it represented something far rarer: change. People had watched Travis spend weeks observing Marcus. They had watched his assumptions slowly collapse one by one. Now they had seen him openly acknowledge that he had been wrong. For many inmates, that admission carried more weight than they expected. Yet Marcus treated the moment the same way he treated everything else. He did not celebrate it. He did not mention it again. He simply moved forward. Over the next several days, something unusual happened. More inmates began approaching Marcus directly. Some asked for advice. Others asked about books. A few wanted help setting personal goals. Marcus never presented himself as an expert. He simply listened carefully and responded thoughtfully. The effect was remarkable. Housing Unit C felt different. Conversations that once focused entirely on complaints gradually shifted toward possibilities. Daniel Brooks noticed the change more than anyone. One evening, he sat beside Marcus near the library window and looked around the room. Several inmates were studying educational materials. Others were writing letters. A few were discussing plans for future employment. "You know," Daniel said quietly, "this place feels different than it did a month ago." Marcus followed his gaze across the room. People change when they start believing change is possible. Daniel smiled. "That sounds like something you taught for years." Marcus chuckled softly. "Maybe." Before Daniel could ask another question, an officer entered the housing unit carrying several pieces of mail. One envelope immediately caught attention because it required a signature. The officer approached Marcus directly. After signing for it, Marcus opened the envelope and removed a formal-looking document. He studied it for several seconds before carefully folding it and placing it inside one of his books. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Good news again?" Marcus nodded. "Very good news. Are you going to tell me what it is?" Daniel asked. Marcus smiled. "One of my former students was recently honored for lifetime achievement in education." Daniel laughed. "Another student?" Marcus nodded. "He earned it." Later that evening, Daniel found himself thinking about the growing list of successful people connected to Marcus. Business owners, instructors, educators, leaders. Every week seemed to reveal another former student doing something impressive. Eventually, he asked the question that had been forming in his mind for days. "How many students did you actually teach?" Marcus paused before answering. "Over the years?" Daniel nodded. Marcus thought for a moment. "Directly and indirectly?" "Probably several thousand." Daniel nearly dropped the book he was holding. "Several thousand." Marcus smiled at his reaction. "A long career gives you a lot of time." The number spread through Housing Unit C faster than any rumor before it. Several thousand students. Even Travis struggled to process it. The realization forced everyone to reconsider Marcus yet again. They had already learned he was a respected Taekwondo instructor. They had learned he operated a successful academy. They had learned influential people still traveled long distances to see him. Now they were learning the scale of his impact had been far larger than anyone imagined. A few days later, another visitor arrived. This time, the visitor was an older man with gray hair and a professional demeanor. During the visit, staff members observed something they had seen repeatedly with Marcus's visitors: respect. Genuine respect. When the meeting ended, the visitor shook Marcus's hand and thanked him for lessons received decades earlier. Decades earlier. The phrase echoed through the prison once the story circulated. Marcus had not merely influenced people recently. He had been influencing lives for generations. That night, Travis sat quietly near the television area watching Marcus read beneath the familiar window. The older man looked exactly as he had on the day he arrived. No different. No more impressive on the surface. Yet Travis finally understood something important. Strength was not always measured by what a person could do in a single moment. Sometimes it was measured by the number of lives improved over a lifetime. As lights out approached, Daniel looked across the room and realized the mystery was finally disappearing. The facts were becoming clear. Marcus Jackson had trained masters. He had mentored leaders. He had built a legacy that stretched far beyond prison walls. And yet the most remarkable part was that none of those accomplishments seemed to matter to Marcus nearly as much as helping the next person sitting in front of him. Several months after Marcus Jackson first arrived at Blackstone Prison, the memory of his arrival felt almost unreal. The quiet older man who had walked through the gate carrying a small property bag seemed like a completely different person from the man everyone knew now. Not because Marcus had changed. In truth, he remained exactly the same. The difference was that people finally understood what they were looking at. The assumptions had disappeared. The stereotypes had disappeared. The judgments had disappeared. What remained was respect. Genuine respect. One evening, shortly before sunset, Housing Unit C settled into an unusually peaceful rhythm. Some inmates read books. Others wrote letters. Several worked on educational assignments. The atmosphere felt noticeably different from the one Marcus had entered months earlier. Daniel Brooks sat near the library desk reviewing paperwork when he noticed Travis Walker approaching the familiar chair by the window. Unlike previous conversations, there was no hesitation this time. Travis sat down across from Marcus and smiled. "You know something?" he said. Marcus looked up from his book. "What is that?" Travis shook his head. "When you first got here, I thought I had you figured out in less than 5 minutes." Marcus smiled softly. "That is a common mistake." Travis laughed. "Yeah, I know that now." For a moment, both men looked out the window together. The fading sunlight stretched across the prison yard. Finally, Travis asked the question that had probably been waiting since the first week. "When that coffee got spilled on your uniform, why did you stay calm?" Marcus closed his book and considered the question carefully. The answer, when it came, was surprisingly simple. "Because I spent many years learning that not every challenge deserves a response." Travis nodded slowly. Marcus continued. "Most people believe strength means proving yourself every time someone doubts you. The truth is the opposite. Real strength means knowing when no proof is necessary." The words settled over the conversation. Daniel, sitting several feet away, heard every one of them. So did several nearby inmates. Nobody interrupted. Marcus rarely spoke about himself, which made moments like this feel important. Travis looked thoughtful. "So you never felt the need to show people who you were?" Marcus smiled. "The people who mattered eventually learned. The people who did not learn would not have believed me anyway." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. Reflective silence. The kind that appears when someone says something worth remembering. Later that evening, Daniel joined the conversation. "After everything we have learned about your past, there is still one thing I do not understand." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Only one." Daniel laughed. "Fair point. But this one matters. Why did you never tell anyone about your accomplishments?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. His eyes moved across the room. He looked at the inmates studying, talking, and helping one another. Then he answered, "Because accomplishments are not character." Daniel listened carefully. Marcus continued, "People spend too much time introducing themselves through achievements. What matters is how you treat people when those achievements are no longer visible." The room seemed quieter after he said it. In many ways, those words explained everything. Marcus had arrived with no reputation, no academy, no awards, no students standing beside him. All those things existed outside the prison walls. Yet he had earned respect anyway. Not because of what he had done years ago, because of who he chose to be every day. As lights out approached, Marcus returned to his book while conversations slowly resumed around him. Daniel looked across the housing unit and realized something remarkable had happened. Marcus had not transformed Blackstone Prison through authority. He had transformed it through example. One conversation at a time. One lesson at a time. One person at a time. Across the room, Travis sat quietly reflecting on everything he had learned. Months earlier, he had judged an older black inmate based entirely on appearances. Now he understood how wrong that judgment had been. Marcus Jackson had never needed to prove his strength. His life had already done that. And as the lights finally dimmed throughout Housing Unit C, the man by the window opened his book and continued reading, completely unchanged by the admiration surrounding him. In the end, that was the lesson everyone would remember most. The strongest person in the room had never felt the need to tell anyone he was strong.